I've been asked by a few people to do a video about the Commodore Amiga, so here goes nothing. I've got to go quickly because there's a lot to fit in. In 1982, a guy called Larry Kaplan, ex-Atari programmer, ex-Activision founder, contacted Jay Miner, who was the designer of the Atari 2600 and 400 computer. Kaplan had been approached by a consortium, an oil baron and 3 dentists, and offered $7 million to design an advanced games console. So he went to Miner, and they formed a company called High Toro and began working on a system based around the Motorola 68000. But then Kaplan was coaxed back to Atari, and Miner took over the company and secretly began building a computer. The investors wanted a console, but he added a whole load of stuff that you wouldn't have in a console: expansion ports, serial ports, parallel ports, all of that. High Toro gained financing, or intended to, by producing games for the Atari 2600. But just as they were going to market with those, the console market crashed. This had the benefit, though, of Miner being able to build a computer. The investors realized there's no point building a console, no one's going to buy it, so okay, go and build your computer. By the time the hardware was more or less ready, High Toro, who were now going under the name Amiga, were running out of money, and they were approached by Atari, who offered them $3 per share for 1 million shares and loaned them $500,000 to complete development. Now they were devious because they knew Amiga couldn't afford to pay that back, and what they wanted was the custom chips, and of course if they couldn't pay the loan back, well, they'd just buy the company out. And they offered them 98 cents per share when Amiga couldn't pay them the loan back. And it looked like Atari were going to get their way. They'd get the custom chips, build a console with them, the Amiga computer would be out of the window. But then at the last minute, Commodore stepped in, paid Atari $1 million to pay off the loan, and bought Amiga for $4.24 per share. And in '85, the Amiga 1000 was released, and it was promoted at its unveiling by Andy Warhol and Debbie Harry. The Amiga 1000 didn't really sell well. It was very expensive, fairly underpowered. But then in 1987, Commodore set their own people to work designing the Amiga 500. Most of the original designers, Jay Miner and the like, had already left. They didn't like the way Commodore were doing things, so they left. The Amiga 500 was the one you see here, cut down, much cheaper, good home computer, fairly affordable. And at the same time they released the Amiga 2000, which was like a big box version with a hard drive, separate main case, keyboard and a monitor, mainly for business. There were other models. There was like the CD-TV, which was completely abortive. The Amiga 500 Plus, which had an upgraded operating system, upgraded graphics, a little bit upgraded, more video RAM. They didn't release that in the US, which was unfortunate for US gamers because most of the best games used it. Then they released the Amiga 600, which was like a miniaturized 500 Plus, but everyone hated it. It didn't sell at all well. Then in '94, Commodore went... No, 92. I'm getting ahead of myself. Commodore brought out the Amiga 4000 and 1200. 4000 was a big box machine. 1200 was, a smaller home version. They used the AGA chipset designed by Dave Haney. This was better graphics, basically, more colors, improved everything. Sound was the same. The 4000 had a faster CPU. They used the 030 at 25 MHz and an 040 version at 25 MHz, while the 1200 had an 020 at 14 MHz, which wasn't a huge leap. But if you added some extra system RAM, fast RAM as they called it, it doubled the speed of it just like that, which was kind of cool. You could add accelerator cards to both machines, all the way up to the 68060 CPU, and then later PowerPC chips like they were using in the Apple Mac at that time, similar kind of thing to what they had in the iMac. Then in '94, Commodore went bust and were bought by Escom, created a subdivision called Amiga Technologies, who continued to sell 1200s and 4000s. Then in '97, Amiga was bought out by Gateway 2000, renamed Amiga International. They had lots of plans, not much came of any of that. And in 2000, Amiga was bought by Amnio Development, renamed Amiga Incorporated. They kind of moved into mobile phones, you know. The Amiga really became software-based. But a company called iTech were licensed to build a PowerPC-based machine called the Amiga 1, and Hyperion produced OS4. Right, I'll show you briefly the operating system. Let's zoom in on that. This is the original version of Workbench on the Amiga 500. It's a little bit clunky. They went for a very high contrast just so you could run it on a TV and still be able to see what you're doing. You know, most machines, well, like the Apple, using a graphic user interface, you needed a monitor. But the Amiga, you know, it was designed so you could run it on a telly, so they went for high contrast. It's a lot like Windows, really. Only, of course, it came out a lot earlier than Windows. It was revolutionary at the time, and it was multitasking. You know, you could run more than one program at once, which under DOS, well, yeah. The less said about that, the better. So there it is. I mean, it's on a 500. It's fairly slow, fairly clunky, kind of ugly, but it worked well. On the 1200. Oh, what am I doing? Here we go. Now, this isn't the standard colour scheme. This is my own colour scheme. It's kind of hideous, but I just like the original blue. Let's see. Yeah. It's a lot quicker. This is running on the 68060 processor, so it's way quicker. And Directory Opus was one of those must-have programs. File management, basically. You could just copy things around, you know, from one folder into another folder, here, there, everywhere, do all kinds of processes on them, archive them, unarchive them, or you name it. You could pretty much ignore Workbench and work in Directory Opus if you wanted to. It was a wonderful thing. I'm going to show you inside my 1200 tower, just because it's a little bit special, though I don't think you'll be able to see an awful lot. Yeah, well, you've got the hard drive there, no cradle, it's sitting on a load of CD cases. This is, oh, it's an expansion board of some kind. I think it's for the extra. I've got a high density floppy drive which doesn't come as standard in an Amiga. They normally use double density 880K discs, though it could read low density PC discs, 700K or whatever, but not your high density ones. This thing hooks up and lets you use a PC high density drive. You've got there the Zorro bus board, which is very non-standard for a 1200. That was an additional extra doofer that I bought. There is a 68060 processor in there. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show that to you. You might just be able to see the top of it. Yeah. That's my accelerator card there. That's got the 060 chip on board, extra RAM. There's also a SCSI controller built onto that, which allows it to run this CD writer, which was a very, very cool thing to have back in the day. I've got here a get my words out, stripped down, opened up Amiga 1200, bog standard, and you can see the custom graphics chips here. That one's Alice, that's Gail, what's this one called? Lisa, that's a Budgie. I don't know why it's called Budgie. These are the ROM chips. Somewhere on here is the 020 processor. I'm not even sure which one it is, to be honest. I probably should have found out before recording this. That is PCM-CIA socket. You could run memory cards and other gubbins on there, and that is the main expansion port. Well, that's where you plug your accelerators and whatnot in. But there you have it. Very brief. Couldn't say half of what I wanted to, but yeah, serves its purpose. Thank you for watching.